Welcome to Caribbean Business Review, where insight meets impact. We bring you economic and financial updates, sharp statistical breakdowns, and data-driven insights on the forces shaping the region. Smart analysis, bold ideas, real Caribbean intelligence. This is CBR. Welcome to episode 13 of season 2 of the Caribbean Business Review. I'm Joseph Cox. Thank you as always for your continued support across our digital platforms and on MKR Radio. This week we bring you a special edition of Caribbean Business Review where we revisit a pivotal conversation with Lilia Burunciuc, the World Bank's Country Director for the Caribbean. Her insights on tourism transformation, economic linkages, data-driven incentives, digital modernization, and the structural reforms needed to build resilience have become even more essential in the wake of Hurricane Melissa. This is not a replay. This is a strategic briefing for Jamaica's reconstruction moment. And in today's CBR briefing, we analyze Jamaica's post-Melissa reset, the economics, the risks, and the political capital at stake. Our new midweek series, CBR Intelligence Notes, is also live, delivering deeper, data-driven insights every Wednesday. Look out for the next edition. But before we begin today's briefing, we need to address a widespread narrative. Christmas isn't just a season in Jamaica, it's an economic engine, and this year it matters more than ever. Hurricane Melissa compressed household incomes, disrupted supply chains, and pushed thousands of micro and small businesses into survival mode. But the final 6 weeks of the year traditionally deliver 20 to 30% of annual retail sales, a surge that supports wholesalers, distributors, agro-processors, entertainment, transport operators, vendors, and the wider tourism economy. If Christmas commerce performs even 80 to 85% of a normal year, three things happen. Cash flow stabilizes, SMEs get the liquidity they need to restock, repair, and reopen. Employment rebounds faster. Seasonal hiring absorbs displaced workers and reduces the shock to household consumption. GDP contraction moderates. Strong distributive trade offsets part of the Q4 losses and provides momentum heading into Q1 2026. This is why the logistics corridors matter. The earlier reopening of Kingston's ports, Montego Bay Airport, and key commercial districts gives Jamaica a narrow but critical window to capture holiday demand. In short, Christmas commerce is a bridge between disaster impact and economic recovery, the single most immediate stimulus Jamaica can regenerate without new borrowing. But there is a social dynamic we must interpret carefully. In the aftermath of Melissa, some influential voices are calling for a quieter Christmas season, a symbolic alignment with those most affected by the disaster. While well-intentioned, these performative utterances carry real economic consequences. Toning down commercial activity does not uplift the most vulnerable. It shrinks the very cash flows that small shops, vendors, transport operators, artisans, and community-level enterprises depend on to recover. In a post-disaster economy, solidarity is not expressed by suppressing demand. It is expressed by ensuring that economic life continues so people can earn, rebuild, and restore dignity through work. And it's important to be clear, Jamaica is not facing a binary choice between celebrating Christmas and supporting those hardest hit by Melissa. We can walk on chew gum at the same time. The country can maintain compassion, mobilize relief, and stand with affected families while still allowing the economy to function. A healthy level of Christmas activity is not disrespectful. It's one of the fastest ways to restore incomes, stabilize small businesses, and ensure that communities have the resources to rebuild. This year, Christmas commerce isn't a luxury. It is Jamaica's most immediate and self-generated stimulus. With that clarity in hand, let's turn to the stories we are tracking this hour in Market Watch and Global Pulse. Coming up in the Market Watch, the multi-billion-dollar reconstruction package for Jamaica. Antigua and Barbuda posts record $254 million primary surplus, and Dominica introduces new minimum wage structure. Then in Global Pulse, OECD upgrades global growth outlook, Canada's unemployment falls to 6.5%, and U.S. Cyber Week sales hit $44.2 billion. All that and more this hour on Market Watch and Global Pulse. Coming up next is the CBR Briefing. This is a CBR Briefing. I'm Joseph Cox. Now, Jamaica has entered one of the most consequential economic periods in its modern history. The government's third supplementary estimates, which has been tabled, confirm a $29.3 billion expansion in national expenditure driven entirely by the fallout from Hurricane Melissa, a storm that inflicted a reported $8.8 billion in damage, or 41% of GDP. Updated macro targets from the Ministry of Finance suggest that one, real GDP for fiscal 25-26 is no longer projected to grow at 2.2%, is now expected to shrink by 4.3%. Two, inflation is projected to surge to 9.5%, up from 5.3%, largely due to the collapse of local agricultural output. Now, these revisions mark a profound economic reset, and for the first time since the pandemic, Jamaica will suspend its fiscal rules, granting temporary policy space until March of 2027. This is necessary to execute reconstruction, support displaced households, and manage a multi-year recovery, but suspension comes with real risks. It alters the credibility trajectory Jamaica has built over a decade of fiscal discipline, and it places an unusually high demand on public sector execution, targeting, and transparency. At the center of the reconstruction effort is a $6.7 billion package from 5 major international financial institutions. But this support is not merely financial. A significant proportion of the support package is expected to come in the form of policy-based loans, or PBLs, though details are pending. Now, historically, PBLs from multilaterals are often tied to reforms in areas such as fiscal governance, tariff structures, social protection, efficiency, disaster risk management frameworks, and public sector operational performance. If similar policy conditions are applied here, Jamaica will need to sequence them carefully. Such measures, depending on timing and design, can sometimes introduce pro-cyclical pressures, for example, tightening fiscal or regulatory environments at a moment when households and businesses require the greatest cushion. Without clarity on the final policy matrix, the risk cannot be quantified, but it remains a structural consideration for government as it balances long-term reform commitments with short-term recovery needs. And beyond the economics, there's a political economy dimension that cannot be ignored. The government enters this reconstruction period with a renewed mandate following the September 3rd general election. But the scale of the fiscal reset, the suspension of the rules, and the reliance on policy-based financing all carry political risks. Modern reconstruction is as much a governance test as an engineering one. Indeed, reconstruction, unlike campaign commitments, unfolds slowly, visibly, and under intense public scrutiny. How the administration sequences relief, controls inflation, manages transparency, and executes reforms will determine whether this becomes a period of strengthened political credibility or accelerated political fatigue. The administration therefore now carries 3 major political risks: the inflation trap. A surge to 9.5% erodes real wages, elevates food insecurity, and heightens frustration. Voters feel inflation immediately, even if its origins lie in natural disasters. The visibility gap. Reconstruction takes time. Hardship is instant. Governments historically own the pain faster than they can showcase the progress. And finally, the governance premium. As fiscal rules are suspended and more than $53.5 billion is directed to recovery programs, including a proposed $24.2 billion loan to JPS for grid restoration, Jamaicans will demand transparency in procurement, equity in distribution, and speed in execution. Any lapse risks political capital burning far faster than it was earned. Yet within these risks lies opportunities. The current situation forces Jamaica into a triple-track balancing act. 1, rebuild quickly. Electricity, roads, water, housing, agriculture. 2, protect macro stability. inflation, debt trajectory, reserve adequacy, fiscal credibility, and 3, maintain political legitimacy during an emotionally charged, resource-scarce recovery period. Success requires speed without waste, spending without loss of discipline, and reform without political overreach. Recovery is therefore not only an economic challenge, it's a test of governance, sequencing, and strategic leadership. This is your market brief. Jamaica secured a major boost with a $6.7 billion multilateral recovery package, even as the government expanded its fiscal 25-26 budget by $29.3 billion following Hurricane Melissa. The banking sector remains stable with loans up 6% and deposits up 12%. In Grenada, government projects growth between 4 and 6% for 2025, low inflation and falling unemployment, while the $1.9 billion EC 2026 budget places emphasis on cost of living relief and strengthens CBI governance. Dominica has approved significant minimum wage increases of 20 to 30% across major job categories. Meanwhile, Antigua and Barbuda posted one of its strongest fiscal outcomes on record, achieving a $254.9 million primary surplus and reducing debt to GDP to 61.4%. The IMF's Article 4 review of St. Lucia highlights steady growth but warns that rising rollover needs, weak productivity, and elevated non-performing loans require multi-year fiscal and structural reforms. Turning to the Bahamas, VAT collections reached $478 million in the first 8 months of 2025, with just 157 large firms accounting for more than half. Inflation remains contained but rising, while external reserves strengthened and domestic liquidity tightened. In Bermuda, foreign portfolio assets climbed to $1.19 trillion. And in St. Vincent, the country's first VAT-free shopping day has been deferred. That's your market brief on the Caribbean Business Review. For more, look for us on YouTube and Spotify.
In a world of constant change, insight is your greatest asset. At Joseph Cox & Associates, we empower innovation across the Caribbean. Whatever your challenge, we can help. We're proudly customer-centric, offering bespoke solutions tailored to every partner. From innovation and digital transformation to leadership and policy, our services are designed to deliver lasting impact. We partner with leaders across sectors, from finance and government to energy, tech, and infrastructure, helping them navigate complexity with confidence. Our work is grounded in collaboration. We connect regional leaders through powerful networks, driving change through joint research. Discover more at josephcox.org. Joseph Cox & Associates. Insight, experience, impact.
Hello everyone, I'm Joseph Cox. The Caribbean is now entering a defining moment in the post-Melissa recovery. The immediate shock has passed and the region is shifting from emergency response to the far more complex work of reconstruction, financing, governance, institutional readiness, and long-term competitiveness. And the timing could not be more critical. In less than 2 weeks, winter tourist arrivals will commence and early signs of economic momentum are already emerging. Rio has confirmed that all 7 of its hotels, some 4,274 rooms, are now reopened, and Iberia Star is once again welcoming guests at its Rose Hall complex in Montego Bay. These milestones matter. That tells us that physical restoration is advancing rapidly and that Jamaica's largest foreign exchange earner is preparing for a high-stakes winter season. But these gains also sharpen the strategic questions before us as a region. How do we rebuild smarter? How do we finance resilience? And what institutional safeguards do we need to protect recovery efforts as reconstruction accelerates? And as the tourism sector reopens, the conversation about rebuilding is also a conversation about transforming tourism itself, deepening local linkages, reducing economic leakage, diversifying beyond cruise arrivals, and embracing digital and sustainable models that strengthen long-term competitiveness. Earlier this season, we sat down with Lilia Burunciuc, the World Bank's country director for the Caribbean. At the time, her insights were powerful, but today, they're essential. She spoke about the structural weaknesses disasters expose, the financing instruments available to small states, the reforms that strengthen competitiveness, and the central role of institutional readiness and human capital in building true resilience. She also offered a timely perspective on the future of Caribbean tourism, that the need to embed stronger data analysis in incentive design, and the growing global demand for sustainable and experience-driven travel. Given the moment we are in and the magnitude of the decisions Jamaica, for example, must now make, this is one of our more consequential conversations that we have hosted on CBR. So today we revisit this interview not as a replay, but as a strategic briefing for Jamaica's reconstruction and tourism transformation moment. So let's dive in. Welcome back, everybody. This is the Caribbean Business Review, and I'm Joseph Cox. And today we're going to be speaking with Lilia Burunciuc, who is the World Bank's country director for the Caribbean countries. And we're looking primarily today on a perspective that she shared a little while ago about rethinking Caribbean tourism. And she's looking at building a sustainable, inclusive, and resilient future. Now, in welcoming you to the program, Lily, I wanted to raise with you a couple of issues. And it struck me that in the article, one of the references you made was that, there needs to be this transition in from dependency on cruise tourism over into the overnight. And you anchored it in some metrics and so on in terms of, the expenditure patterns, etc., etc. But I'm curious, how feasible is that transition that you reference within the context that, for example, Jamaica, 50% of the tourists is cruise, the Bahamas and Cayman, probably about 75% of their market is cruise tourism. How feasible is that transition, and how do you really envision that sort of transformation occurring over the, I would say, medium term?
So cruise ship tourism is very important for the Caribbean. But the world is moving, and the tourism sector is moving worldwide. And more the tourists are looking for different type of experiences. Nature-based tourism, cultural tourism, venture tourism. And these are the types of tourism that need to be developed faster in the Caribbean, because the Caribbean is not adopting these new types of tourism as fast as some other parts in the world. And the argument that our tourism report is making, we just prepared a regional tourism report, the World Bank issued a regional tourism report, is that the Caribbean countries can get much more revenues and economic and social benefits from the tourism sector if they implement a few changes. More can be done regarding the cruise ship tourism. The countries can, and we can talk about this later, countries can employ various actions that will allow them to get more from the cruise ship tourism. Also, developing other types of tourism that I just mentioned, the spending per visitor, if you compare the cruise ships with the adventure or nature tourists, is 24 times. So we get 24 times more from one tourist who comes for adventure tourism or nature-based tourism, and a tourism who just visits on a cruise ship.
No, I hear you on that, but one can't ignore the fact that, for example, for 2024 in the Bahamas, they are referencing that they earn roughly $1 billion just from their cruise sector alone. No, just from a straight economic standpoint, that is going to be a hard sell for any kind of thing. And frankly speaking, when you look at the Bahamas, I'm not sure to what extent, for example, nature tourism would have any real appeal for what I have seen thus far, to be honest with you. And places like Aruba, that would be out of the question, to be honest with you, because Aruba, as you know, is a desert. They import everything.
Yeah.
I that's what I'm trying to explore with you. How feasible is this really and truly? I can see it for places like Dominica. Don't get me wrong. I get that. Dominica, there's a clear point. Probably St. Vincent, to some extent Grenada. But beyond that, probably St. Lucia. Beyond that, I'm not sure how does work within the larger.
Yeah, this is actually a very good question, because nobody is saying abandon the cruise ship tourism. No, the message is countries can get more out of the cruise ship tourism. This is the message. And by the way, when you look at the cruise ship tourism around the world, the Caribbean is the biggest. There are more cruise ships in the Caribbean than in any other region in the world. So it's a huge business. But at the same time, when you look at how much revenue per passenger the Caribbean countries are getting, is less than any other region in the world, which means that there is quite a lot that countries can improve and change to get more out of the cruise ship tourism. So the point is not replace it. The point is develop and get more out of this segment, tourist segment, but then also invest in new tourist segments, because the priorities for the tourists are shifting. They are more into, and I'm not only talking about the nature-based tourism. Of course, some islands will be more suitable for that than others, but it's also cultural tourism. It's also culinary tourism. It is different types of tourism. And if one island may not have the same type of nature as in Dominica, there are carnivals and festivals, as far as I know, on all islands. The cuisine is interesting, and tourists love. They love learning about new cuisine and tasting new types of food. So, yeah.
No, your
that's
point.
that's what I wanted to say.
No, I get it. I get what you're driving at, and it actually segues into a very interesting development, because part of the challenge I would advance to you is with the Caribbean tourism product is that our linkages are weak. Backward and forward linkages are very weak, and I'm just wondering, and that is when I speak to that. Well, of course, I'm referencing things like how the agricultural sector will feed into the tourism sector, etc., etc. Now, from your use it, what is it? What are the real imperatives to really drive and strengthen those linkages so that we get more of the local foods, call it the Caribbean foods for this conversation, but the local foods into this space, more of the products and services that will be offered by the local, and how to that sort of cultural dynamic into a renewed and refreshed tourism product?
Yeah, very good question. Now we're talking about a different segment, the hotels, and often all-inclusive, but not only. You're right that we call it like economic leakage, meaning that, yes, there are big hotels. And by the way, in the 80s, this type of tourism was developed because the countries in the Caribbean were losing their manufacturing revenues from manufacturing jobs in manufacturing and agriculture, and tourism was the new way of creating new jobs and of course developing the economy. So at the time, countries tried to attract the investors and provided a lot of incentives for the hotels, including the incentives in terms of importing a lot of food and then other materials that they needed, because this was not available on the islands at the time. It is very important to look back at all these long-term concessions and see, or long-term tax exemptions and duty exemptions, import duty exemptions, and see how the economies of countries can benefit more and how the linkages can be established. I was talking to the private sector in Jamaica recently, and we were actually at an event at one of the all-inclusive hotels, and it was there were visitors from outside at that event, and the foreigners were saying, "Oh, we know about this very tasty local fruits and vegetables in Jamaica, but we don't see any at the hotel." And then the private sector, the Jamaican private sector, they said, "Yeah, about like 10 years ago, we were not ready to supply the fruits and vegetables to the hotels to meet the standards in terms of quality, also in terms of quantity, and also in terms of being able to supply it year around with no interruption. But today, we are ready. We do need, and these are like bigger suppliers. The point they were making is that the governments may need to provide a little bit of support to them. And by the way, this support to them in terms of setting the programs for backward linkages, maybe eliminating some of the tax exemptions for the hotels to import the food, because then they don't have a level playing field, for the local suppliers who don't have tax incentives and the hotels that have tax incentives. Anyway, more can be done to provide these linkages to the hotels. Another area that I would like to mention, it's not only the all-inclusive hotels, it's also other types of tourism, because even when tourists come and stay not at all-inclusive hotels, you need support for the small businesses to be able to create these other opportunities for tourists, to be able to go to like concerts. There are more reggae probably concerts outside of Jamaica than in Jamaica.
That is true. But Lilia, before I take your point well, and I actually agree with you where in terms of the music and the various festivals and so on. But I want to go back just a little bit on the issue of the linkages and the procurement processes, because part of the thing that we need to take on board, I would argue, in this conversation, is that the bulk of the hotels, at least the major chains, are owned by global establishments. They are operated by global establishments that have centralized procurement practices. So I don't know that saying the government to remove whatever incentive or duty incentive that may exist, I don't know that that would necessarily treat with the challenges that they face in terms of meeting particular standards. You quite rightly referenced the quantity and the quality and reliability of supply, etc., etc. I don't know that any Caribbean government, frankly speaking, will be able to do that, to really ramp up that. Isn't the converse actually true, that the onus is on the private sector to organize themselves in a sufficient manner to meet those standards and therefore be able to compete effectively?
Everybody will have to chip in, so to say, in terms of the actions. First of all, the governments need to see if there are any incentives in place for the big hotels that makes it easier for them to import. If there is but they have the hotels have a preferential treatment and they don't have to pay import duties, or these import duties are reduced for them, this needs to be looked at first. Secondly, for the local producers, governments around the world are investing in helping the private sector to, first of all, establish the standards and then help them meet the standards for food production. And as I already mentioned, 10 years ago, local food producers in Jamaica maybe were not at the level. Some programs were tried, were not at the level that they are today. But today, the private sector is interested in stepping in. But they need a level playing field, but they also need some incentives, not incentives, but some support from the government to negotiate, because it's very difficult for the private sector to negotiate with the hotels. If there is support from the governments to negotiate with the hotels, I think we can make more. Overall, the Caribbean countries can make more progress. And I've traveled a lot throughout the world. I've stayed at the same big chains in other parts of the world. It was Bali in Indonesia, in Delhi in India, in the Philippines, and so on, and stayed at all these chains that somehow you see the local products in the hotels, and it's the same hotel chain with the same centralized procurement rules. They are able to negotiate, the governments are able to negotiate with those hotels and set programs and systems for the backward linkages. And I think if they are successful, the Caribbean could be successful as well.
All right, point well taken. But then it also carries me on to another point, because part of the challenge, and take Jamaica out of this one, because Jamaica is probably the exception to this rule. How many countries within the Caribbean have anything whereby they actually monitor the quantum? I noticed in your article, your reference had, I think, between 2010, 2013, 7% of the incentives were quantified at roughly 7% of GDP. But whereas that might be a notional figure, I suspect, how many countries actually measure through what we, the economists, would call the tax expenditure budgeting? How many of the countries actually take on board that sort of process? And as I said, take Jamaica out of it, because I know Jamaica has it, because I was one of those who helped put that in place. But tell me, and what is the World Bank? What is the role that you would see the bank having in building out that sort of framework where we no longer speak in notional terms, but concrete terms about this is the value of the incentive that you have provided, this is the impact, this is the return that you're getting from it, so we can have a more coherent type of response?
This is a very good point about knowing the situation and knowing the cost of this. We call them tax expenditures. These are, in a way, tax incentives. Apart from Jamaica, I don't think other countries have the capacity to really do this analysis, because there is a huge deficit of data. First of all, if you have a deficit of data, it's very difficult for you to do the analysis. And then also the capacity to do this type of analysis. So we at the World Bank, and not only us, other development partners as well, are happy to step in and work with the governments to help them do this analysis. You already mentioned some of the numbers that we came in our report, tourism report. It took us 2 years instead of 1 year to do all the analysis in that report. And one of the main reasons was data. It was so difficult to get the data. We had to actually do many surveys on our own to be able to understand and analyze the situation, because it's very difficult to do anything when you don't have the data. So our advice to the countries, with the help of development partners on their own, if they can, or using local think tanks, or using the universities, UI has very good capacities, to do a very good analysis of what the countries are getting from these tax incentives for the hotels. Of course, they're getting the jobs, but is this enough? And all the revenues that the governments have lost and then underinvested in their economy during that time, is this equal or more than the benefits that the countries got from getting more jobs? The hotels also provide a lot of additional challenges for the economies. For example, waste management, which is on in a way responsibility of the government, and let's say other environmental damages. On some islands, 80% of wastewater goes into the ocean. Wastewater management is another big challenge for the country's islands. So it's not only the revenues they're getting from the hotels, but they also need to look at the environmental impact and other impacts on the island that detracts from that. So this type of analysis needs to be done.
No, absolutely. Well, there are two things. Let me respond to your last point first. One, I remember some years ago, don't try and date me now to tell you exactly when it was, but I remember some years ago, an argument of this nature was advanced, and there was tremendous pushback from the cruise lobby, one, and two, frankly speaking, there was division among even some of the countries because if you know how powerful these lobby groups are. So I'm not even sure where that is now and if that is even feasible to do it. But I take your point quite well. The other aspect of it is that it seems to me that in measurement of the tax, the incentives, the value of the incentives, what we call the tax expenditures, the honest truth of it is that what I would suspect is required is a multi-year project. This is not for those countries that do not have the data sets in place. What it will necessitate and what happened in the Jamaican experience was that, for example, the tax forms had to be redesigned so that it actually captured the data in place. Then you had to have, of course, probably additional training for some persons who are going to be looking after these things and monitoring them, etc., etc. So it is not a short-term type of intervention. But I suppose the question for you would be from where you sit, because you are the country director for the Caribbean countries. To your knowledge, has any of the countries even expressed an interest in doing this sort of analysis?
It will be very difficult for countries like St. Lucia and Grenada and Dominica to develop a full-fledged capacity to do this kind of analysis because it's expensive. I would say that in this case, it's better to develop the capacity at the regional level. Use regional institutions. Use regional institutions that can, of course, build whatever capacity is needed to collect the data and systems that are needed to collect the data, but then build the capacity to analyze and monitor it throughout the years, because I agree with you, one-off analysis is useful, but not that useful. You also need to be able to see it in the longer term. So the regional tourism organization, the Caribbean Tourism Organization, or for specific regions, the OACS Commission. So there are regional bodies where this capacity can be developed and can be, I think, very beneficial, and dealing in this way with the capacity constraint. But let me go back to the first point you made, because you are right. The cruise ship industry is super powerful. It's very difficult to negotiate with them. And they're very skillful at playing one country against the other. But I think there is a reason why in the Caribbean, the revenue per passenger is the lowest. It's even higher in the Pacific, where it's the same situation. There are, countries, separate small countries, but it's higher there because they somehow found a way of negotiating more as a region rather than individual countries. There are good examples. Barbados recently increased the tax for the cruise ships per passenger for departures, and it actually was quite successful. If some countries can do it, others can probably do it as well. But what I would like to suggest is that I think would be very good if the countries get together. I know that's politically very, 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 very difficult, but I don't see other way around it. The countries will need to get together to negotiate with the cruise ships. And I already mentioned in some discussions and for us, why not? And this is an idea that came again from one of the countries, one of the ministers from the Caribbean countries. Why not include Caribbean environmental tax for the whole Caribbean Sea? So no matter what country you go and visit in the Caribbean, if you are in the Caribbean Sea, you pay, I don't know, $5 per person or whatever, a Caribbean tax, which is uniform throughout the Caribbean Sea. This could be one. Of course, another one could be some local, other local taxes like waste management or any other taxes that can be then used by the countries to offset, first of all, get the revenues, but also offset the damages, the environmental damages that are being brought by the Caribbean.
No, right, that's fair enough. That's a perspective. I'll be very honest with you. If they couldn't even agree on a $1 tax for the air travel, for the air industry, And that was supposed to have been used to offset some security costs. Good luck with that $5 charge. But we're running out of time. So let me move quickly on to another aspect of it, because artificial intelligence is here. The ILO has indicated that some 39% of jobs that already, use some elements of AI might be either eliminated or absolutely transformed by 2030. I'm raising this within the context. A lot of the jobs in tourism right across this region, or let's realize that tourism occupies anywhere between 7 to 90% of GDP right across this region, dependent on the country, obviously. Most of those, that's a service industry. A lot of those tasks, at least at the lower levels, the mid to lower levels, can easily be replaced by technology. How do you see the environment now, from where you sit as an international development partner, to basically future-proof, as it were, the workforce within this region? And particularly, of course, as it treats with the tourism sector.
When I look at the Caribbean, and I think, where are the opportunities for future growth and development? I think the whole digital sphere is super important. And the Caribbean, frankly, blessed with a lot of people with a lot of, creativity and rich culture, music. I know the animation industry is very strong. And in general, I think the creativity industry in the Caribbean is one of the industries that has a lot of potential. And when you combine this with the digital development, good connect, using the new digital tools, it's one of the possibilities for the future development of the Caribbean. But a lot needs to be done to make sure that the region doesn't miss this opportunity. First of all, in terms of setting an environment that will allow all this creativity and all the potential to be realized, improving digital connectivity, improving on the cost, because it's very expensive. Today, the connectivity is very expensive. Digital connectivity is very expensive. Making sure that the rules are harmonized so that it's not a different rule in each of the islands. The next aspect is digital skills. Improve the training on digital skills. And make sure that these skills are also transferable from one country to the other country in the region and are recognized. And then also improve the offerings. If we're talking about tourism, tourists are looking for new opportunities, for new types of like entertainment and so on. And the hotels need to get more prepared for that. Actually, tourists are also looking for more sustainable tourism. And as our study has shown and the survey has shown, the tourists are willing even to pay more for the sustainable part, like to pay an extra small fee, that if they know that this money is going to be used transparently to improve the overall environment for sustainable, for example, in renewable energy and other sustainable parts of the tourism, but also the economy as well. So investing in creating an environment to embrace this digital world and investing in skills and making sure that this is then incorporated in the various businesses, hotels and tourism, but any parts of the economy as well, I think would be very beneficial for the Caribbean countries.
No, indeed, I would absolutely agree with you. And as we leave this conversation, from where you sit, you're you now for the bank. What are the policy areas that you would really envision for true deeper engagement with this region as we seek to develop and really achieve our full potential?
I'll mention 4 areas that
Okay.
we actually went through thinking exercise. If we were to select 4 critical priorities for the region, what these 4 critical priorities would be. So I'll mention these 4. It doesn't mean that the other areas are not important, but we thought these 4 are really critical and we would like to work on them. The first one is for the region to become one economic space, free movement of goods and people. The region we know has a lot of small countries with huge problems with these economies of scale, because small economies, of course, if you don't have the economies of scale, it's very difficult to compete. So for the region, becoming one economic space is very, very critical. And this pertains to rules and regulations, trade facilitation, connectivity, becoming one economic space, also connected internally, but also externally. So one economic space is one. And we, as the World Bank, are increasingly supporting regional programs, trying to help to move in this direction. The second area is continue to strengthen the resilience. We all know that resilience is the name of the game in the Caribbean, given its geographical location, given all the natural calamities that happen very often. And by the way, this is the region with the highest impact of calamities as percentage of GDP in the world. So continue to invest in resilience, both with external assistance, but also a lot can also be done internally in terms of zoning and land use codes and so on. The third area that is important, we already discussed it, is the digital, embracing the digital transformation, because this is the future. And I'm not going to say more here because we already discussed it. And the last one is continue to invest in human capital, because main capital of any country is its human capital and skills. Yeah. Let me stop here.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I could never disagree with you on that. So what's really left for me to do is to express my profound thanks to you, Lilia Burunciuc. Yes.
Yes.
Who is the World Bank's country director for the Caribbean countries, for coming and sharing her thoughts with us today. And indeed, we do hope that we'll be able to get you back from time to time as we continue to explore this process of development right across the Caribbean. So thank you so much again.
Thank you, Joseph. It was a pleasure.
Indeed.
Bye-bye.
In a world of constant change, insight is your greatest asset. At Joseph Cox & Associates, we empower innovation across the Caribbean. Whatever your challenge, we can help. We're proudly customer-centric, offering bespoke solutions tailored to every partner. From innovation and digital transformation to leadership and policy, our services are designed to deliver lasting impact. We partner with leaders across sectors, from finance and government to energy, tech, and infrastructure, helping them navigate complexity with confidence. Our work is grounded in collaboration. We connect regional leaders through powerful networks, driving change through joint research. Discover more at josephcox.org. Joseph Cox & Associates. Insight, experience, impact.
Welcome to Market Watch. I'm Joseph Cox. We begin in Jamaica, where international partners have assembled a $6.7 billion three-year recovery package following Hurricane Melissa. The government has expanded the 25-26 budget by $29.3 billion, targeting road repairs, housing, and tourism restoration. GDP is projected to decline 4.3% this fiscal year, with a gradual return to 1 to 2% growth. In St. Lucia, the IMF projects 1.7% growth in 2025 after a strong 4.7% rebound in 2024, supported by construction and domestic demand, despite temporary tourism softening. Inflation should remain low at 0.8%, with public debt stabilizing near 77% of GDP. In the Bahamas, growth steadied in October as tourism normalized. Air departures rose 0.1%, while vacation rental nights increased 4.6%. Banking liquidity tightened, excess reserves fell $90 million, but external reserves climbed to $2.93 billion. VAT performance remains robust, with 157 firms generating over half of the $478 million collected year to date. In Bermuda, foreign portfolio holdings grew 13.8% to $1.19 trillion, fueled by expanded U.S. exposure and strong insurance sector asset growth. In Grenada, the IMF estimates 4.4% growth in 2025, while the government projects 6.2% as construction, manufacturing, and agriculture drive activity. Inflation has eased to 0.7%, unemployment has fallen to a record 7.5%, and fiscal performance has exceeded budget expectations. Antigua and Barbuda reported $254.9 million primary surplus, one of the strongest in its fiscal history, reducing debt to GDP to 61.4%. Dominica has approved revised minimum wages with 20 to 30% increases across all major job categories. But before we wrap, here's a quick look at regional currencies and market performance. The Jamaican dollar trades at $161.06 to the US dollar, Trinidad at 676, Suriname at 38.95, and Ghana at 218. It is gold traded at 131.43, while all others maintain their US dollar pegs. On the equities side, Caribbean markets were mixed. The JC index slipped 0.37% to 313,597 points, and Trinidad All TNT index was down 0.31% to 1,354. Barbados and Bermuda were essentially flat, while the Caribbean Exchange Index posted a modest gain. Top performers included National Enterprises Limited up 11.1% and Cygnus Credit up 8.97%. Biggest declines came from JPSCO 7% and JPSCO 9.5%, down 19% and 13% respectively. Now that's it for your Market Watch. I'm Joseph Cox. Global Pulse is up next. This is CBR. Welcome to Global Pulse. I'm Joseph Cox. We begin with the United States, where Cyber Week sales reached $44.2 billion up nearly 8% year-on-year, driven by record shopper turnout and aggressive discounting. Energy markets focused on OPEC Plus, which will begin annual capacity audits in 2026 to align output quotas with real production. In Europe, Amazon announced one of its largest fee cuts ever, lowering seller and fulfillment fees to counter rising competition from Shein and Temu. The OECD upgraded global growth to 3.2% for 2025, citing AI-driven investment that offsets U.S. tariff headwinds. The U.S. outlook improved to 2% growth, China's projected near 5%, and India remains the fastest-growing major economy. A new survey from the European Chamber shows 1 in 3 EU firms shifting sourcing away from China as export controls cause delays and compliance risks. Brussels responded with a new economic security doctrine, accelerating diversification in critical materials and technology supply chains. Turning to labor markets, Canada delivered an upside surprise, adding 54,000 jobs in November. The unemployment rate fell to 6.5%, its sharpest monthly improvement this year. In the U.S., ADP private payrolls data showed a 32,000 decline, driven by small business job losses. Meanwhile, core PCE inflation eased to 2.8%, strengthening expectations for an early 2026 Fed rate cut. In Asia, China is expected to maintain its 5% growth target for 2026, but only with continued heavy fiscal and monetary support. Services PMI readings slipped again, signaling soft demand and margin pressure. In Japan, business confidence hit yearly highs and inflation held at 2.8%. Tokyo also approved a 18.3 trillion yen supplementary budget to support households and strategic industries. Finally, in the UK, the government approved £28 billion in grid upgrades to bolster energy security. The Bank of England launched the world's first stress test of $16 trillion private market sector, citing rising leverage risks. And a quick look at today's commodities and global markets. Oil prices firmed across the board with WTI at $60.18 and Brent at $63.82, both up nearly 0.9%, while natural gas surged 5% on colder weather demand. On the equities side, Wall Street edged inched higher with the Dow up 104 points, S&P 500 up 0.19%, and Nasdaq up 0.31%. In Europe, the markets were mixed, with the FTSE 100 slipping, but Germany's DAX gaining 0.61%. In Asia, Japan's Nikkei fell 1%, while Hong Kong's Hang Seng jumped 0.58%. Now that's your Global Pulse. I'm Joseph Cox. This is CBR. That's a wrap on episode 13, season 2 of Caribbean Business Review. Well, thank you so much to our loyal audience across MKR Radio and all digital platforms for your continued support. As always, we live by our mantra that knowledge is strength, but information is power. In this special edition of CBR, focused on reconstruction imperatives after Hurricane Melissa, we revisited a pivotal conversation with Lilia Burunciuc, exploring how the region can reimagine tourism as a real driver of resilience. Now, some of the strategic takeaways are tourism recovery must become tourism transformation. Reopening hotels is only the first step. To drive long-term growth, the Caribbean must rebalance away from leakage-prone cruise models towards higher-value overnight nature and experience-driven tourism. 2. Resilience depends on stronger local and data-driven foundations. Deepening local supply chains, investing in human capital, and using data to design smarter incentives are essential to reducing vulnerability and improving competitiveness. And third, the next phase of growth requires coordination and reform. As global demand shifts towards sustainable tourism, Caribbean countries must strengthen governance, embrace digital transformation, and work regionally to negotiate effectively and compete globally. Now, please remember, our new CBR Intelligence Notes are released every Wednesday, providing deeper midweek analysis on the biggest economic and policy issues across the region. You can also listen to this broadcast at your convenience on Spotify. The latest edition of the Caribbean Financial Dispatch is live on LinkedIn, WhatsApp, and linked in the YouTube comments. To subscribe, please email us at caribbeanbusinessreview@gmail.com. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and follow Caribbean Business Review on TikTok, Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, X, and LinkedIn. Until next week, same time, same place, I'm Joseph Cox, and this has been CBR.